no one winds up eternally separated from God that doesn't want to be.
Right. That would be the quote-unquote definition of taking the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
It's like you have attached the name of God to something that you never said nor intended, but you are now stamping the approval and the authority behind his name.
I think where holiness as a movement might have begun to miss the mark is that it, in some ways, it was more of a reaction than a response. Become curious again now that the noise has receded a little. Yes, they accepted a false reality. You just have to remember they're living in a funhouse world, but they used to know that. They don't know that now because they accepted what the hypnotist implanted. Yeah, so we're living in a world that truly has a mission.
That's the whole problem.
What if I told you you were meant for something more? And what if at first sight your birthright was inked in blood? And what if dominion was written in big bold letters? And what if we shouldn't just occupy but overcome? And what if the observation of opposition was us? Antikemi, the podcast.
In 1963, the CIA released a classified manual for counterintelligence interrogation methods when interrogating resistant subjects. And they called it the kubark, which was their code word for themselves, Kubark, their code word for themselves, the kubark counterintelligence interrogation manual. In that manual, I think it's on page 60 or 62, they start talking about a method of interrogation for extremely resistant sources that they call the Alice in Wonderland method. And what they do is they use at least 2 or 3 interrogators that come into the room with a plan to disrupt the subject's sense of reality. And they do it by starting with what they call a double talk phrase or nonsensical phrase. They throw out a nonsensical phrase, like a question that's, like, they don't use this example, but let's just say, how many lemons would bark at a meowing tomato? And the subject starts to try to answer, and as soon as they start to try to answer, the next one comes in with a completely unrelated and equally nonsensical question, and they hammer the subject so unrelentingly with just these non sequitur after non sequitur. It's one of numerous approaches they had to trying to make somebody fall through the rabbit hole into a reality they have so little understanding of that their psyche becomes so desperate to be able to make sense of their surroundings that they become extremely suggestible. And as soon as you throw them a life preserver, even if that life preserver involves discussion about something that could be self-incriminating or compromising,
Ultimate
they're probably
deception.
going to grab at it because they're drowning in their inability to establish a framework of reality that they can exist within. And that methodology has been explored in neurolinguistic programming and other areas at this point pretty extensively. One terminology for it is confusion method. Bottom line is it's possible to bend the nature of reality so far that someone will accept any version of reality you offer them to stop the pain of not being able to find their bearings. I think this might be one of the reasons the Bible is so speaks in such strong terms about something like iniquity, because it so distorts the nature of God's reality. It so distorts the framework of the world that he has created for us to inhabit and have dominion over, that it makes humanity extremely suggestible when we find ourselves drowning in an atmosphere of sin, transgression, and iniquity, that we become extremely suggestible to any voice that will begin to make us feel like there's a framework we can exist within. So I could see the Most High taking that very seriously because of the way it lowers our spiritual and emotional immune system, depresses our spiritual and emotional immune system. And we've been talking about it. I think we should continue that discussion here.
What's more of a needed subject for someone trying to live in Antikemi,
right,
than recognizing one of the greatest weapons used against a believer is them falling prey to sin, transgression, and iniquity. But even more so, how we have compressed all three of those terms to mean the same thing when they really do not.
Right.
And I think it's important for us to understand that Scripture does distinguish between those three and how the atonement for sin has operated in the believer's life. I'll never forget sitting at my desk one time and getting a phone call from a buddy of mine who I didn't know at the time when I received the phone call that he had kind of deep dive the Hebrew Israelite, type of theology. And one of his first questions to me was like, all right, John, what is sin? And the way that I, immediately grasped for, missing the mark and how I understood it, he hit me, of course, with 1 John 3:4. Sin is transgression of the law.
Right.
And he kind of like doubled down on that point. And I didn't have a great answer inside that moment. And so that definitely piqued my interest for like wanting to like really understand what we understand as sin and how should we navigate that terminology and how the Most High looks at it,
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, something that's very, very necessary. And I'm going to find value in kind of playing this back even for myself. We missed y'all last week.
Yes.
We did not have a new episode last week, but we're back and better than before. You are tuned in to Antikemi, the podcast. My name is Jonathan.
They call me Shules.
We're going to be your tour guides for the next however long that y'all will rock with us. We need you to first do all the things. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Shout out to all the people who have joined recently. We definitely appreciate you joining.
Seems like each episode now brings its own little pop.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Those of you who are joining Antikemi Nation, we salute you. We appreciate y'all spreading the word. Hit that like button. That definitely shows the algorithm that this is valuable. Let's go ahead and continue to get those likes up and drop a comment. Like, let's continue the discussion in the comment section. Send it to somebody who you would think would find this content valuable. And don't just send it to them without saying anything. I mean, break down what you grasped from it, what you took from it, and why you feel like it's important. Especially for an episode like this, talking about sin, you may want to give a little bit of disclaimer for who you're sending this particular episode to, but we definitely appreciate it. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, and of course, if you're watching us, we're on YouTube. So yeah, those are all the church announcements.
I love it.
You love it? The other day in service, when I don't know, like I'm kind of curious, what made you kind of start to break down sin iniquity and transgression, or sin, transgression, iniquity, as far as those levels.
Well, there had been a prophetic word. There
Right.
was a divine interruption in our service, and
Right.
there was a prophetic word. And the prophet referenced that concept kind of in passing.
Yeah.
But part of that word to our local assembly had to do with the Holy Spirit challenging people who, to varying degrees of intentionality, might be dabbling in, committed to, or having been impacted by what we call occult practices. I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the fact that the word occult itself doesn't necessarily come with the baggage that we think of it with, because it technically just means hidden. But when we say occult practices, we do usually mean what you could also call dark arts, or basically manipulation of energy and the laws of the universe to try to accomplish our will without necessarily being submitted to, the Most High. In fact, a lot of people that are in that world are very strong proponents of, and a lot of them are in the so-called conscious or awakened community. There's a prevailing opinion in many circles in that realm that, God is within, not without and above. And to me, that's a false dichotomy. I think religion tends to obscure the fact that God is within. But I think that the dark arts are very uncomfortable with the fact that he is also without and above. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it means that there's accountability.
Yeah. So it's like they can point at what religion has often been afraid to let people discover, the God within, the way that the Most High expresses himself through the fractals of each human life. And in and through all things. But by the same token, they're not always offering truth on the other side of that. Just because you point out an inconsistency, an error, or a lie doesn't automatically mean that what you then offer as the substitute is ultimate truth. It still has to be discerned. And so I say all that to say, I think there are people in that room that are very conscious of being in a state of rebellion to the Most High. Then there were other people that were in totally different headspaces where they're trying to figure out, am I dabbling? Is this area of my life on the line? That kind of thing.
Right.
But I felt the need to dig in a little bit on those definitions, sin, transgression, and iniquity, because basically for the benefit of the ones, I think in my heart at that moment, I was reaching for the ones who were most resistant to the correction from the Lord.
Right.
Because I was saying, be careful.
It's a warning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was like, bro, you probably have already passed from sin into transgression at the very least.
Right.
If you go too far down this road of digging in your heels and justifying yourself in the face of conviction and refusing to hear and heed warnings, you're going to cross the boundary into iniquity, which is a much deeper pit. The blood of Jesus still paid the price for it. You can still be dug from it.
Yeah, the writer of Hebrews makes that clear.
But it is a much deeper pit.
Yeah.
And fewer people make it out.
Absolutely, because in my opinion, at that point, you've crossed over into a complete heart posture.
That's right.
That's been transformed. And so hence the new creation being necessary. But it's funny because just yesterday I heard somebody kind of describing the Eastern Orthodox view of hell and eternal torment.
Yeah.
And I would think it would definitely differ from the traditional.
That's a rabbit hole we haven't touched yet.
We have it. We might need to
At some
explore
point.
that in a future episodes for sure. But it was interesting, their slant on it that I had not heard before. They were saying the whole gnashing of teeth aspect was people who had decided to, turn away from God in this life, but in eternal torment, they're still basically shaking their fist at him, and the gnashing of teeth is them still denying and dishonoring and disrespecting God, even after everything that they thought was lies or false proved to be true. Their heart has been so torn and so turned, they're just without reprieve at that point. That was interesting to me.
Yeah, that touches on, and I have seen that explanation and found it helpful. That touches on, regardless of where somebody lands on, because contrary to probably the majority understanding in popular Christendom at this point, there actually is nuance around how Bible believers and Christians have understood eternity and particularly the issue of hell. And there is nuance there that maybe most people aren't aware of. So definitely a rabbit hole there. But leaving that to the side, I would say unequivocally that we should and could all agree that no one winds up eternally separated from God that doesn't want to be.
Right. Straight like that. Period.
In the core of their soul. It's not like they get into that eternity and are suddenly filled with true, repentant remorse. The posture of their heart remains, and I think that is that concept of where iniquity can take you. And it is worth asking the question, like, why are we talking about this on this podcast? Well, this world does not only have a sin problem. The truth is the sin problem has been solved. And if the only issue was sin, and we'll get into definitions, but if the only issue was sin, basically, no one would be continuing without benefit of what the Savior has done. Because if the only issue was sin, which is basically just not getting it right, man, all you have to do is tell everybody.
Yeah.
Jesus paid the price. But you run into, some people don't want to hear that. They don't want to know that. And you run into some people continue to want to intentionally. At that point, if you intentionally aim at something other than the mark and hit it, can you be said to have missed the mark? That's not exactly a miss. Yeah. You hit what you were aiming at. Right. So that starts to veer more into the trespass territory, or transgression, really. And then comes iniquity, where you dig in for so long that you actually begin to reframe reality around that posture. And yeah, so we're living in a world that truly has an iniquity issue.
That's the whole problem. I loved it how when you were kind of framing it, I think you used the example of like iniquity was like transgression is like you crossing over the line.
Yes.
There's a line that's there, and you intentionally see the line, and you decide I'm going to step over the line because that's what I want to do for whatever reason, right?
Yes.
I've crossed over the line, and I'm perfectly cognizant that I'm crossing over the line.
Transgress is overpass or break away.
Right.
And it has the implication of revolt. So the level of intentionality is a lot higher.
Right. But then you went into iniquity. And not only have you crossed over the line, but you've decided I'm going to move the boundary marker to a place where now I've crossed over, but then I've redrawn the boundary to give the impression that I am still righteous because I haven't crossed the line, but I've actually moved the boundary. And so I've reframed or I've remade the rules according to my own worldview. I've recreated my world in my own image.
Yep.
And that's the danger of iniquity when you've started to go. I think that's where the Lord gives them up to a reprobate mindset, where it's like, I've decided not only am I going to do what I want to do, but I'm going to redefine what's right and wrong.
Yes.
And I think we can all look around and we can clearly see what's considered right and wrong has definitely been reframed and repackaged and remixed right now. Things that we would have never argued about years ago are now being looked at as like, oh, no, we can redefine this definition.
Yeah, the subversion of reality is an iniquity issue.
Yeah.
So if we think of it in terms of boundary markers on property, so if we think, just pretend that the Most High, that his estate is next door, and there's a clear boundary around the holy property that belongs to him. And you're the neighbor, and you're having a party and doing keg stands, and you get drunk, and you're doing a keg stand, and you tip off the keg, and you're off balance, and you crash into the fence and break it down a little and land on his property. That would be sin.
Right.
You crashed into the boundary. You did break it. The level of intentionality wasn't very high.
It could be argued either.
Yeah, it could be argued. Like, you did decide to be an idiot, even though you knew about the boundary, and you knew you were near it. But it wasn't necessarily malicious. It's just you being you, and you're kind of an idiot, and so you broke the boundary. That would be sin. On a dare at the same party when you're stone cold sober. Yeah. Throwing bottles over the same fence, over the same boundary. That's transgression.
Right.
You know exactly what you're doing.
Right.
You're just doing it anyway because
you're not inebriated
you want
out
to.
your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wanted to. But then comes iniquity. Iniquity starts bending the fence inch by inch and coming in the dead of night and actually uprooting the posts and moving them a little at a time, trying to bend the boundaries to actually distort people's understanding of what is holy and what's common. That's iniquity, because now you're trying to gaslight yourself, everyone else, and God.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Oh, this has always been here.
Yeah, that's, oh my goodness. To think that we would really try to gaslight God.
Right.
My goodness. But it happens.
It really does.
And I think people with a straight face would say, no, this is how I'm going to redefine whatever this is.
Yeah.
You've got it all wrong.
Yeah.
And I think leading other people down that same path carries consequences.
Right. Yes, sir.
My goodness. So it's funny because the Bible is pretty clear to me that there's multiple ways that sin is described. So the first definition that like is commonly, I think is probably the most holistic way of describing sin would be transgression of the law.
Right.
And that's what John said. Then I find it really interesting, too, that James categorizes sin as knowing to do good and not doing it.
Yeah.
So not only is transgression of the law considered sin, but knowing to do good and you do not do it, that is also considered sin.
Yes.
And I mean, we can spend a long time kind of breaking that down.
I mean, bro, I have a drinking problem. That's like the third time that's happened on this podcast. Just to make that real simple, because we mentioned that in the service you're talking about, too. Mm-hmm. It's a little challenging when we're saying there are these three categories. And by the way, they are messy categories, even in Scripture.
Yeah.
The same words can be used in different places where the connotation leans more one way or the other. Different translators make different decisions, so these are not legalistic categories. Mm-hmm. It's messy, it's nuanced, but there are these three basic categories. But then it's a little challenging when you're saying sin, transgression, and iniquity, but then you define sin as transgression of the law. Right. Well, then, are we down to two? Well, not exactly. Mm-hmm. But I think part of it is easily explained if we understand that what Jesus said keeping the law is the most important. If we're saying we need to understand what missing the mark is, then we need to understand what the mark is. And Jesus says over and over, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So the point is, James is bringing forward, if you are not actively loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor the way that Jesus has so clearly laid it out for us, and then lived it out in such a way that he could bring it all down to the bumper sticker, love as I have loved. That's the one command left. I think that when we say to him that knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, to him it is sin, it's because failing to meet the mark of love truly is transgressing the law of God. It truly is violating the boundary lines of good and right. So
that's good. And then Paul in Romans, he says whatever is not of faith is considered sin.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that to me, like, broadens it quite a bit. Like, if you're not operating in a place of faith, now you're giving full opportunity for sin. to be introduced into
Yes.
the equation. Like, that's heavy to me. And then, of course, the writer of Proverbs says despising their neighbor. Proverbs 14:21. That's considered sin.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. Right. So that was really, really
To
interesting.
despise also in Scripture, usually my understanding of it is it carries, remember, despise is the opposite essentially of respect.
Yeah.
So to despise typically carries the connotation, in my understanding, of not caring about the needs of, or the to despise someone is not to care about what it is right to give them, to how it is right to approach them. It's not having any regard for. You know what I mean?
I do. How was sin presented to you growing up?
That's funny. First of all, I would say there was a level of condemnation. I don't just think that the people that I was raised under put condemnation on me about sin. I think they were under significant condemnation too.
Themselves,
Yeah. Because first of all, I would say there was not a clear line in my mind between what it meant to break the law of the Most High and what it meant to break the rules of the religious context that I was in.
There we go. That's the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
Right there. Man, I'm so happy you said that. Those lines were so blurred for me
Yes.
about truly what was breaking God's heart
Yes.
and what was breaking the rules
Yes.
that were, in fairness, designed to keep you from ultimately breaking God's heart. But a lot of times there was not a lot of nuance or distinction made between, okay, this is something that we have designed. It's not necessarily sinful. However, this could lead to a lifestyle of sin. And so we just want to avoid taking that route. And so let's just go ahead, tighten up these guardrails to the point.
Yeah, I mean, we both grew up in old school holiness Pentecostalism, essentially, and I mean, I would still say, if pressed, that our church is in that tradition. Like, I have great respect for the holiness tradition. However,
I've grown to come to respect it too.
yeah,
Which is kind
it's
of
a
funny.
process, right?
Yeah, the older I've gotten, the more that I've kind of seen, like, I understand a little bit more why this was kind of put into place.
I think, as with many things, it was somewhat reactionary. And you have to be careful with things that are reactionary.
Right.
They were reacting to a real issue. which is like easy believism. It's just not true that Jesus died, lived a sinless life, died like a criminal, laid in the grave for 3 days while conquering Hades and death, and then rose on the third day so that you could spit in the face of God and then be his dinner guest in eternity. It's just not true.
No.
If Jesus is Lord of your life, first of all, if he's the Savior of your soul, he will be the Lord of your life.
Come on.
Second of all, if he is Lord of your life, your nature will begin to change to reflect his more and more. I think where holiness as a movement might have begun to miss the mark is that it in some ways it was more of a reaction than a response. And so in those areas where it was reactive, the methodology that was applied was actually very rabbinic. It's very much like rabbinic Judaism, like
Really?
Orthodox
I
Judaism.
got you. Yeah.
Yes, because it's very much what Jesus was constantly running into, which is the precursor of rabbinic Judaism, because there was still a priest caste in Jerusalem. At that point, though, it wasn't the actual OG Levitical priesthood operating the way it was supposed to. It had been very politicized, very Romanized. So Jesus was dealing with a version of Judaism that was becoming increasingly more recognizable to modern eyes. The seeds were there. For instance, what became the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, most of those traditions were already pretty well formed and committed. Most of the Talmudic thought was already pretty formed. He called it the traditions of the elders. It was codified within less than 100 years of that time, So the point is, the thinking in that circle was we have to ensure we never break the written law of God by creating a fence around it with other rules and regulations that are designed to keep us so far from the boundary that we don't
Ever cross
it. And that is kind of, I heard basically that exact thinking quoted. Like some of the preachers that I came up under and we came up around would actually say that. Well, we know that this rule is stricter than what Scripture says. However, we're trying to make sure that we set the boundary back far enough. Well, what's really happening there is we are systematizing compliance. But we're avoiding the one thing Jesus was after the whole time, which was the heart. Yeah. And Jesus consistently said that the heart is what the Father cared about too. Man judges the outside. God looks at the heart.
So if you're compliant without having any type of transformation in your heart, you're still missing the mark.
Yeah, and an even weirder one is, what if someone appears quite non-compliant? God can see their heart. Yeah. They're very carnal. They're very stuck in their habits and patterns. But man, it breaks their heart when they miss the mark and they want to do the right thing. They want to please God. And So he could be looking at someone very compliant who doesn't actually care, and someone quite non-compliant who deeply cares, and have a very different evaluation than we would about either person. So if we consider that, then we have to realize that the heart really is the whole ball game. Like the posture of your being toward His holiness is really the whole ball game. It doesn't mean that compliance doesn't matter. It just means that aiming for compliance misses the heart of the issue. I don't know if I'm putting that into words.
No, that makes
adequately.
a lot of sense. No, it makes a lot of sense. And man, we've lost so many people and who fell in between the cracks. I think this is what a lot of the deconstructionists have started to build their foundation on, is that like y'all lied to us. Y'all made it seem like this, that, and the third were sinful and wrong, and other things that are actually sinful and wrong are getting roped up into that, because it's like they've literally tried to like throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
It's like throw it all away. It's like, no, there was a lot of wisdom in some aspects, but there was a lot of misrepresentation in others. And it created a level of harm.
Yeah.
You know, for people who knew once they started to like educate themselves, like, number one, it's never felt right, but now that I'm like reading it, like all the more, like if you've lied to me or made me feel less than with this aspect, then yeah, throw it all away.
I have a really random question. And it's a weird one. As a kid growing up on the predominantly white side of holiness Pentecostalism, because there are organizations in the same vein that are predominantly people of color, but growing up in a, I guess I should say not predominantly, but a more European expression, we'll just put it that way. Was there any cognitive tension for you around the way we talked about women's hair? Did that strike you as weird at all as a kid? The emphasis was so much on long and uncut. Did that ever spark a question for you?
I don't think it sparked as much of a question for me personally in regards to hair, just because, I mean, when I grew up, my dad was pretty much balding. And so, like, he was shaving his head. And so that the hair wasn't a thing. And for us boys, we always kept our hair nicely trimmed and cut low. That was more of like the military side of him. It's like that was with those standards. My mom, on the other hand, I don't think that she would be considered having traditionally black people hair.
That's true, yeah.
And so her hair,
it wasn't different enough.
It wasn't different enough. And so, and like my mom has actually said that she didn't grow up, in that type of like rigidness, so to speak, as far as holiness standards. She actually, really appreciates that. As she came to faith, she was able to kind of like discover her own convictions and kind of move as her relationship with the Lord grew naturally. But she even said that she remembers, like she got saved in the era of the miniskirt. So she, recalls, wearing miniskirts to church, and how she appreciated, like, the church mothers did not come down hard on her. They recognized her as somebody who was a new convert just coming into faith.
I didn't know Mama Brewster was a sinner.
I mean, who would have possibly could imagine, right? Yeah, but she's always kind of said that, and I'm like, I can appreciate that. That wasn't always what I saw personally in some of the stricter confines of some of the organizational like formats, that I kind of saw. But yeah, I think that's a great question as far as like how hair was discussed for one race as opposed to another.
Well, it sparked one of the early questions for me about the way we were thinking about things. Because I remember sitting in church and looking at one of the sisters that was black, and I remember being genuinely so confused that her hair was short in my mind. And so I eventually asked my parents about it. Why does sister, I'm not going to say her name because she's still living, but why does she have short hair?
Sister Goodjoy.
And I just remember my mom laughing and saying, well, honey, like, her hair's as long as it'll grow. Like, to my mom, it was kind of a nonsense because she was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Right.
But the reason it was breaking my brain was because I had so often heard the phrase long and uncut. So it wasn't just uncut. And there was a whole argument about, because Paul said nature itself teaches you. And so there was a whole argument about the fact that it does have to be long and also uncut. And so
she's breaking the laws of God.
Bro, I kid you not. I remember sitting and being worried, talking about 3-year-old Shules, thinking, like, so would God, I was almost struggling with Calvinism, like predestination. I was like, so would God create somebody that can't be saved? Because...
Wow.
And that's what I mean about, like, that was, I don't think any of them would have ever said you couldn't be saved with cut hair.
No, of course.
But that was the impression I got from the preaching.
Yeah, at 3 years old, I wasn't having those type of
maybe I was
crises in my mindset. That's funny, though. I do remember picking up the bobby pins. I was on the floor.
After they shouted them out?
I do remember that.
Yeah.
That's a very real memory.
Good times.
Funny story. Little things like this.
This episode gonna be so weird for people that have no background.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, that religious baggage is real. I remember, we had a rule. We didn't go to the movies. Like, that was just not something that was allowed. It wasn't like explicitly said that it's sinful, but that is an activity that we in our home and in the faith tradition that we were a part of, you just didn't engage in. What didn't make sense is that I was able to see the same movie at the house.
Oh, see, I didn't have to deal with that, but that would have confused me.
Right, so it was just like no moving pictures.
Yeah, literally, we use that phrase, moving pictures.
No moving pictures for you.
No talkies.
Right, but for us, it was like, it was the location that the moving picture was being shown at.
The movie house. That's the other thing.
The
that
movie
was
house,
the verbiage.
Right. But it was confusing to me because my parents allowed us to, we couldn't have cable television, but we had a monitor. That was...
I remember when I left the very intense background that I came from and came into the more organized side of it. I was like calling BS on that. I was like, hey, you can call that what you want to.
Right, but it's a TV.
You have a TV.
It's a TV.
My whole life, if my parents would have bought that, I would have been like, whoa, we have TV now.
Exactly. But like that's, I guess it was the way to kind of sidestep, I guess, the standards that were required for the ministers, and my father was, trying to kind of uphold it, whether he fully agreed with it or not. Right. He agreed, like if I'm going to be a part of this organization.
To it, whether or not he agreed with it.
Correct. But I remember questioning, I was like, if we can buy this movie and I can watch it at the house, why can't I see it inside the theater when it's out? And I remember asking my mother that when I was about 16, give or take. And before that, I remember we went to like one movie like in Germany. I remember seeing The Mighty Ducks in theaters. And I don't know why that they let me do that, but they did.
It was a good one. What happens in Germany stays in Germany. I feel like I'm memeing for my whole ethnic
That's hilarious.
community.
Yeah, guys not with the Germans. We get it's like Sodom over there.
I am holding so many jokes in
Oh
right
my
now.
God, right. But I remember having that conversation with my mother, and she was kind of looking at me, and she was just like, "Well, yeah, we just don't go to the theater." But I was like, "But why?" And so she was like, "Well, she's like, there's spirits that are, there's other movies that are playing that you definitely would not be watching, and so why would you go to a place that has spirits?" And I remember I stopped for a second. I'm like, "Well, that sounds good," but I was like, "Mom, there's spirits at Walmart." This is a true story.
No, you're making me laugh because I grew up in an environment where they were basically trying not to go to Walmart for that same reason.
And as I grew older, there's a lot of spirits at Walmart.
Yes, there is.
But I remember saying that, and she kind of stopped. And I really appreciate her for this, because she could have like doubled down and just been like, do as I say, not as I do, or whatever, or try to throw me off. But she was like, "You're right." And at that point, she said, "If you don't have a conviction about going to the theater, then I'm not going to place that conviction on you."
Yeah.
And so if you want to go to the theater, you can go to the theater. We still expect you to be mindful of what you set before your eyes.
Yeah.
And at that point, like, I really grew in respect, from my parents. 'Cause I was like, okay, like, we're now having a real conversation. You're not just throwing, out of context Bible at me. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's when I was, allowed to start going to the movie theater. But yeah, like the religious framework as far as like what was considered sinful. And I don't remember them actually saying like, this is sin or this is transgression or iniquity, but it was so blurry. The lines were so blurry as far as like playing cards.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I thought people that played cards were going to hell. Nobody ever told me that, but I just I gathered it.
These vices.
Yeah.
Drinking alcohol. Yeah. And I remember just being like, the Bible was like clear to me as far as like what's the sin. It's not the actual consumption, but it's what you are doing as far as the excess, right? But of course, I mean, like those boundaries are put in place because oftentimes humans don't know how to have a level of self-control.
This is I'm so glad the discussion is landing here for right now, because I think this is one of the great truths that has crystallized for me as I wrestled with really the deconstruction of my childhood, and then the lifelong process of reconstruction that follows from that, unless you atrophy in the deconstruction, which is what happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
At that point, that's not deconstruction, that's just destruction.
That's destruction.
People that deconstruct have a responsibility for the good of their eternal soul to make sure at some point they start reconstructing. But one of the great truths that has come to the forefront for me is that a lot of the greatest principles in life make the worst rules. There are so many things. This is why the book of Proverbs exists.
Yeah.
This is why Ecclesiastes exists.
Right.
So much of wisdom. See, I was never taught about wisdom. I was taught bad and good, heaven and hell.
Very black and white.
I don't know that was the intention. That's just what I got. That's what I picked up.
Yeah.
There was no nuance. Everything was either good or bad, to the point that to me, the words good and bad were synonymous with sin and righteousness.
There we go.
So like when I was a kid, I asked my mom about circus peanuts. You know, I saw them at the store, and I was like,
Oh, those
Mom,
are definitely sinful.
Mom,
man.
can I have circus peanuts?
Terrible.
And she said, those are bad. Looking back, I realize now what she meant is they're vile. They're disgusting.
Right.
Which I figured out when I turned 18, bought myself a pack of... And I was like, oh, that's what she meant.
Oh, my God.
These are disgusting. So, you know, but I mean, I spent years thinking that circus peanuts were sinful because that's just how all that stuff lived for me. That having been said, the principles that drive so much of this, the older I get, the more I'm aware that it would not be unhealthy to choose not to watch movies or TV. It just wouldn't.
I agree.
It could only help somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, I find value in watching some of those things, sometimes entertainment value. I have to really work to turn off the side of me that's always the observer, the side of me that's always interfacing with it. And because if pretty much any movie that you watch nowadays, if you watch it with enough awareness, you just realize it's just disclosure.
Come on.
So it's challenging to
Yeah.
be entertained by something that you recognize is actively intended to shape the thinking
It's programming.
of a culture. It's programming. But I can deliberately, if I'm very intentional about it, turn that off and have fun with the kids for 2 hours.
Right.
I usually have to then take 10 minutes at the very end and go, but you know, right? Like, because it's very hard for me not to at least just plant the seed for them to be aware.
Right.
But so I'm saying there's a modicum of entertainment value. I don't think the entertainment value is worth the pollution of your soul that comes with it. But there is also value in terms of seeing what are they trying to form in the minds of the public. And but I mean, yeah, so there's reasons to watch stuff. But overall, it'd basically be a good decision for anyone to decide not to have that in their lives. But we have to be clear. That would be a decision grounded in wisdom. That would be a decision grounded in a principle.
Come on.
And you're not dealing in moral absolutes.
No.
You're dealing in, hey, I don't want that in my house. Awesome. Good call, by the way. Right? Like, so there's that. And the heart posture of wanting our clothes and our hair and everything about us to most faithfully reflect the heart of our Creator, and express His image as faithfully as we can. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But making hard and fast rules quickly runs into the issue of it's almost impossible to keep cultural filters out of that. And at that point, you are essentially sitting in the seat of God.
Yes.
You're saying this is sin, this is not, this is, and God never said that. And that's why Jesus was actively rebelling against a fair amount of that. Jesus could have easily told his disciples, just to go ahead and do the ceremonial hand washing just to avoid unnecessary conflict. But he didn't. He instead confronted the Pharisees on it. I don't think that was because the ceremonial hand washing was objectively bad. It was because it was being treated as the law of God,
Right.
and Jesus was determined to shatter that illusion.
I mean, would you go so far as saying that that would be the quote-unquote definition of taking the Lord's name in vain?
Yeah.
It's like you have attached the name of God to something that he never said nor intended, but you are now stamping the approval and the authority behind his name,
Right.
behind this. And that's what he is saying. No.
No, we're not going to do that.
You're not going to attach my name to something that I did not say. You're not going to represent me in a way that I am not representing myself as. There is a problem, and that is a commandment that if you break, that is the law that you're transgressing.
Yeah, I mean, an episode or two ago, we read where Jesus heals the woman who had been afflicted 18 years from a disease born of a spirit, couldn't stand up straight.
Right.
And he heals her on the Sabbath, and the religious folks have an issue with that. And they actually make the statement, like, you have 6 other days to do good works on. Do these good works then, not on the Sabbath. And Jesus kind of flies off the handle. He says, any one of you would let your ox or your donkey out of the stall and give them water on the Sabbath, should this daughter of Abraham not be released to go free on the Sabbath? And he calls them hypocrites. Because the heart posture of being okay with the work that it takes to maintain my assets on the Sabbath, but not being willing to excuse the work that it takes to take care of his assets, is actually demonic and antichrist. The spirit that he was up against there was actually the spirit of Satan. That is the enemy of God that would say, "Oh, sure, water your ox, but don't heal that woman." And that's such an example of how that kind of religious framework tends very quickly to veer into because we are missing the heart issue. We're aimed at compliance and we're missing the heart issue. You can only miss the heart issue for so long before depravity kicks in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My goodness. All right, bro, where you want to go with this? Because I feel like we can take it a couple different ways.
I mean, I'll say this, and then we can go wherever. One thing that I hadn't really noticed before was how similar the words iniquity and inequity are.
Come on now.
And when I looked them up in English, there's actually no difference. I don't know when the last time I found that was. As far as etymologically speaking, they come from the exact same 2 roots.
Same root word.
Not equitable. That's what both of them mean. The same 2 Latin roots, not equitable. It's funny, but not for nothing. almost everything in the Word of God consistently comes back down to God hates injustice. And I think that one of the central problems with sin is that it creates a debt. This is going back to the whole discussion about money. Like, when Cain tells the Lord, my punishment is too great for me, the word there for punishment, and we talked about this a little bit in the episodes where we were dealing with blood money. The word there for punishment is exactly the same word as for transgression. So
I did not know that.
yeah,
That's good.
the word for transgression and the word for the punishment of the transgression are the same.
So that what the Pesha?
Yeah. And then the same with sin. The word for sin and sin offering are also the same. So in other words, the breaking of the law of God creates a debt of justice.
Avoids there.
Yeah. And iniquity institutionalizes that, builds a framework around it to protect it and to recalibrate reality to accommodate it. So basically, iniquity creates a false reality overlay predicated on injustice, inequity, perversion of the right rule of the Most High in this realm. So, yeah, I just found that really interesting. I wanted to throw it out there that iniquity and inequity are the same.
So, going back to transgression for a moment. So that's that Hebrew word, pesha. And you kind of use it already as far as rebellion or revolt. So, of course, this is sin with the willful, defiant edge. So you're not missing the mark accidentally. You are intentionally crossing the boundary line. It implies a relationship that's been violated, not just a broken rule. And so, like that Greek word is parabasis, and he uses that same way in Romans 4:15. For where there's no law, there is no transgression.
Right.
And so, like, that's what the law kind of presents is like, hey, this is the boundary line. And so, since now we have introduced a boundary line, now, if you're choosing to cross it, that's where the transgression now steps in.
Yes.
And now you've crossed over from sin to transgression. But then you navigate into iniquity, which is Avon. It's twisted or bent out of shape. It's a condition, so to speak, or even a crookedness woven into the character of a person.
Yep.
With the weight of guilt and consequence attached to it. It carries the sense of inherited, accumulated distortion. And it's the word behind, of course, in Exodus, it talks about the iniquity of the fathers, right?
Yes.
But then I find it really interesting because you have the prophet Isaiah, and of course, I believe it's the suffering servant passage, Isaiah 53.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading.
Okay, go ahead.
Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted.
Come on.
But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being or our peace fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray, which that word astray is to wander, to vacillate, to stagger, to be intoxicated. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all
To
fall on him.
That's why the prophet Isaiah writing that is so important, because it covers the transgression, iniquity, and the resulting brokenness, of course.
Yes.
In one verse. Because you cannot just deal with theology of sin with just the acts alone and not the dispositional heart posture behind it. Or the willful rebellion, of course. That's all incomplete. That's why we got to have that rebirth and regeneration language. It's targeting not just the behavior, but the modification targeting the acts. Not just the nature, right? I want to get your thoughts on this, though, because when I was doing a little bit of study and I'm looking at this, something I found in Numbers 15 and 30.
Okay.
Now, we can read it like, I first read it in ASB. But then the ESV has a very interesting translation of it. And I think anybody who has kind of followed the pod for a minute, it would jump out at them. So we can start at, I mean, really all of Numbers 15, it talks about, the different sacrifices for it. But we could look at the law of the sojourner, starting in verse 14. So if an alien sojourns with you, or stranger, or one who may be among you throughout your generations, and he wishes to make an offering by fire as a soothing aroma to the Lord, just as you do so, he shall do. In verse 15, as for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you and for the alien who sojourns with you. A perpetual statute throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the alien be before the Lord. Now, that's the NASB. Look at the ESV rendering of that same verse.
Come here, ESV.
Hold on, I want to make sure that's the right one.
That's funny because...
Actually, hold on. I want to make sure I have the right verse. I'm sorry. That's the 1530, not 15. Yeah,
that's what you said.
That's what I said? Okay, yeah. I went to verse 15 for something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my bad. So, go down.
I thought you were going to keep reading.
Right. Yeah, so you can kind of go down, but then...
Yeah, it's funny. The ESV points out what I was going to point out.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's go to verse 27 real quick in ASB. Also, if one person sins unintentionally, then he shall offer a 1-year-old female goat for a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement before the Lord for the person who goes astray when he sins unintentionally, making atonement for him that he may be forgiven. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally. Yeah, that's why I was connecting them, right?
Yes.
For him who is native among the sons of Israel, and for the alien who sojourns among them. Verse 30. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he is native or an alien, that one is blaspheming Yehovah, and that person shall be cut off from among the people.
Yeah.
Now read that in the ESV.
The ESV.
Yeah.
So in the ESV, verse 30 says, but the person who does anything with a high hand, whether he is native or a sojourner, reviles Yehovah, and that person shall be cut off from among his people. A high hand.
That's super interesting to me.
Yes, it is. What did you get from that?
I mean, we've talked at length about
Almost to the point that
just when that type of verbiage is used, a lot of times like the handedness of something
yes,
with the 5 fingers represents metaphorically from a deeper layer looking at scripture, the emotional nature of a person.
yes,
And so you're looking at your sensory nature, what you are interfacing with inside this physical, earthly realm. That nature being enacted, reinforced online,
yes.
at the front of the line. You know, the carnal nature, I guess you could say. And so reading that definition like that of any person who does anything with a high hand,
Yes.
the way I read that is that like you're not only like defiantly, rebelliously, but you've now put your sensory nature, your emotional nature at the forefront. And you're acting from that mentality. You're acting from that mindset. And it's saying whether he is somebody who is native born, somebody who is underneath the covenant, or somebody who is outside who has decided to come underneath the covenant, regardless whether they were there when the law was being presented or not. It's the exact same rule for them.
Or whether they're even covenantally bound.
Yeah, exactly. If that's your heart posture, if that's your mindset, if that's what you're choosing to engage in any practice, that's reviling to the Most High. But then the consequence, like if you read Numbers 15, it's giving you how to atone for sin.
Yes.
How to atone for transgression even. But there's nothing for this.
Right.
There is no fix. There's no resolve for that person who decides to enter in through that mentality.
And it's interesting that it calls it blasphemy.
Yeah.
Which is to speak against. To blaspheme is to speak against or revile, make shameful, bring shame to. It's really interesting. And like when the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, he said that he did it with a high hand and an outstretched arm.
Right.
A high hand, from what I understand, it is aggressive.
Yeah.
It is like that, when you go at somebody and they flinch. Because there's an implicit threat. That's what a high hand is. So it's like we're not talking here about falling into your sensory nature being in the lead. In fact, we're talking about the opposite of that. We're talking about you haven't slipped into the lower sensory nature. You have deliberately fortified that. You've taken a militaristic posture, an arrogant posture of, no, I'm. So when God brought them out of Egypt with a high hand, what was he doing? He was subjugating the gods of Egypt, saying, I am God, you are not. And so essentially, this is what you're saying to the Most High when you sin in this way. So much so that God would hold even members of other nations accountable for that. That if you can dwell in the presence of the Most High where he has his sanctuary and still choose to interact with him that way, you're not a sinner, you're a blasphemer, you're a reviler, this is militaristic opposition.
You don't have room for mercy if that's how you're choosing to interface
Right.
in this world against the Most High God. Like, that's a very sobering thought.
I think this gets down to kind of where I started when I kicked off the plot promise. You know, I used the example of the 1963 CIA manual when they talked about this method they called Wizard of Oz, or they didn't call it Wizard of Oz, they called it
The Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland. They talked about, actually, I read about 15 pages of that document just because I found it so interesting.
Of course you did.
Which is weird because, like, bro, the way they write in those organizations, but this is a little different. This was pretty interesting. I could very much see whoever was writing it was like the classic 1960s Jungian psychotherapist. Like, no doubt he was puffing on his pipe and you could feel the vibe.
Yeah.
But and yes, I did say he. That was definitely written by a dude. But they, in fact, let me see if I can quickly find it. Kubark.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Manual.
Yeah, because I had not heard of that particular interrogation strategy, but I can see how it would be effective.
Yeah,
if
let me
you've
get to
completely taken somebody from their reality intentionally.
Yes.
It's really a dirty trick, man.
They spend considerable time over several pages talking about if you're up against somebody who is resistant, you may need to reframe their reality. So they're talking about the opening phase of the interrogation and why establishing rapport matters. And so they say, how long the opening phase continues depends upon how long it takes to establish rapport or to determine that voluntary cooperation is unobtainable. Because remember, they're leading, up to both coercive and non-coercive methodologies to break someone who will not willingly cooperate.
Gotcha.
But they're saying here, we still have to decide whether or not they will willingly cooperate. It may be literally a matter of seconds, or it may be a drawn-out uphill battle. Even though the cost in time and patience is sometimes high, the effort to make the subject feel that his questioner is a sympathetic figure should not be abandoned until all reasonable resources have been exhausted, unless, of course, the interrogation does not merit much time. Otherwise, the chances are that the interrogation will not produce optimum results. In fact, it is likely to be a failure, and the interrogator should not be dissuaded from the effort to establish rapport by an inward conviction that no man in his right mind would incriminate himself by providing the kind of information that is sought. The history of interrogation is full of confessions and other self-incriminations that were in essence the result of a substitution of the interrogation world for the world outside. In other words, as the sights and sounds of an outside world fade away, its significance for the interrogatee tends to do likewise. That world is replaced by the interrogation room, its two occupants, and the dynamic relationship between them. As the interrogation goes on, the subject tends increasingly to divulge or withhold in accordance with the values of the interrogation world rather than those of the outside world, unless the periods of questioning are only brief interruptions in his normal life. So this is where in the decades that followed, this methodology grew into something that had much less to do with interrogation and much more to do with programming. It's marketing as well. It's now the same concept has come to have a pretty strong hold in marketing. And let's see here. I think I went past the Alice in Wonder. Yeah, here we go. The aim of Alice in Wonderland or confusion technique is to confound the expectations and conditioned reactions of the interrogatee. He is accustomed to a world that makes some sense, at least to him. A world of continuity and logic, a predictable world. He clings to this world to reinforce his identity and powers of resistance. The confusion technique is designed not only to obliterate the familiar, but to replace it with the weird. Although this method can be employed by a single interrogator, it is better adapted to use by two or three. When the subject enters the room, the first interrogator asks a double talk question, one which seems straightforward but is essentially nonsensical. When the interrogatee tries to answer or not, whether the interrogatee tries to answer or not, the second interrogator follows up, interrupting any attempted response with a wholly unrelated and equally illogical query. Sometimes two or more questions are asked simultaneously. Pitch, tone, and volume of the interrogator's voices are unrelated to the import of the questions. So you might scream one question that there's no logical reason why it should be screamed versus whispering one. No pattern of questions and answers is permitted to develop, nor do the questions themselves relate logically to each other. In this strange atmosphere, the subject finds that the pattern of speech and thought which he has learned to consider normal have been replaced by an eerie meaninglessness. The interrogatee may start laughing or refuse to take the situation seriously, but as the process continues, day after day if necessary, the subject begins to try to make sense of the situation, which becomes mentally intolerable. Now he is likely to make significant admissions or even to pour out his story just to stop the flow of babble which assails him. This technique may be especially effective with the orderly, obstinate type. Neurolinguistic programming is pretty, what would you say? It's a hot button issue. It's not widely accepted outside of the practitioners who use it. However, wherever you live, you probably live 15 minutes from somebody who practices NLP, because a lot of people have found it to one degree or another helpful in addressing trauma. I'm definitely not advocating for it. I've never interacted with it. I would have a lot of questions before I did, because I do know that it's designed to basically make applesauce out of your brain and then reprogram it. The degree of trust I would have to have with somebody to let them do that to me.
It's dangerous.
Yeah. But I'm not saying anything for or against it. But what I'm saying is that they very much latched on to this technique. And they took it outside the world of interrogation and brought it into the world of reprogramming, because the idea is they're trying to help people who've been through significant traumas. As with so many methodologies, the idea is to try to help somebody rewire their neural synapses to be able to reframe how they interact with a trauma they've experienced so that they can rebuild their lives in a productive way. So they've latched onto that because they've found it to be effective. At least they feel they have found it to be effective in breaking down someone's sense of groundedness in the reality where they have received their wound. And so by breaking that down and reaching a point, they're not going for a confession. They're going for a point where they recognize that the mental torment of being adrift in a world of nonsensical, in a funhouse world of nonsensical noise has become so great that a person is now ready to accept a version of reality that doesn't align with their present understanding, which is exactly what the practitioner needs to reframe their relationship to a past trauma.
Exactly.
It's also used by hypnotists when they, like hypnotherapists, when they are wanting to do the same thing. They're wanting to get deep into someone's psyche and rewire the neural pathways around an issue. They will use this exact technique on someone, and this is the way that I saw it put in. I lost track of the papers that I looked at, but I think the paper was from 1984, if I remember right. No connection to the book, but I think it was in the early 80s. A paper came out dealing with the confusion technique and how it relates to hypnotherapy. And they were saying, when you're dealing with somebody who is consciously unwilling to be to come under the sway of the hypnotist, but they are subconsciously willing. So this is someone who subconsciously is seeking. Now, I guess the therapist would be the one making the evaluation that subconsciously this person wants my help. Right. But consciously they are unwilling to comply with the suggestions of the hypnotherapist. So an example, is this getting too...
No, it's good, man.
So an example was the hypnotherapist might throw out a series of unrelated suggestions, because remember, hypnotherapy is all about suggestibility.
Yeah.
But this is a person whose conscious mind is preventing them from being suggestible. So now they're reaching back into the CIA annals, grabbing an interrogation technique and pulling it into this context. So what they're doing is they're saying, your left hand is going to become light and want to rise. And before you can react to it, they say your right hand is going to, they say your left hand is going to become light and want to rise. Your right hand's going to remain still. Your right hand is going to become light and want to rise. Your left hand is going to remain still. Both of your hands are going to be heavy and drop to your sides. Your left hand is going to rise up by your forehead. They keep throwing out these clashing suggestions until it reaches the point where essentially
You become compliant.
there's so much torment in your psyche
Yeah.
that you just grab one of the suggestions and go with it. You have locked into the programming. You are now suggestible. You have chosen to be suggestible.
I don't know how close this relates, but honestly, it reminds me of buck breaking.
Talk about it.
I mean, during, chattel slavery, if they wanted compliant slaves, a lot of times the slave master would find the biggest and strongest dominant male, the buck, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
And they would gather up all of their owned slaves, gather them around, and then he would forcibly, completely degrade him sexually.
Yeah, sodomize them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so not only would it break that person mentally, but it would also show everybody else, like, this was the biggest and strongest and the leader, so to speak. And if he is subjected to this, we have no hope of escaping. And so you're establishing dominance from the very beginning.
You're reframing reality.
Yeah.
Because this dude objectively, the dude they're calling the buck, objectively could lead a rebellion.
Yeah.
Physically,
Yeah.
if mental torment wasn't a part of it, if not having a network on the outside wasn't a part of it, if objectively speaking, right, they could lead a rebellion. So you're reframing reality to recast them as, is that correct?
Yeah. I am taking your will away.
It's heavy.
Mm-hmm. It's effective too.
This concept runs deep in every aspect that I've been able to observe of how those who benefit from the subversive order of morally relative, or just morally subverted reality that we call Babylon, or the false reality overlay. This fallen matrix that the world is operated through, the ones that benefit from retaining that structure lean on this kind of methodology very heavily. We might go down the rabbit hole in an episode, because you can really trace how this shows up, like in the algorithm, where if you think about the description we just heard of the interrogation technique, and then you think about what happens to your brain. I saw one influencer had referenced this concept in relation to, you might scroll 25 times in a row, and in that time, if you're doom scrolling, you'll see 3, 4, 5, maybe more completely conflicting
Yeah.
opinions presented as objective fact around one topic, and all framed in a way that in the moment sounds incredibly convincing, but interspersed through that is puppy videos, pranks, people singing happy birthday. Like, if you think about what all can pass through your awareness in an hour of just being on your FYP, the upshot of that is you can genuinely lose your moorings in any version of reality that has served you in waking life, in the real world, so to speak. And so while I wouldn't go so far as to say this is always being systematically used by the powers that be, I think it often is, and is designed to hold us all in a state of consciousness where we are extremely suggestible, so that if suddenly a piece of messaging needs to be released, think, trust the science, or, faith over fear.
Yep.
Whatever. If those in positions of extreme power and influence want to inject a thought form deep into the collective psyche quickly and fully, they have a very conducive environment to do that in.
It's perfect. Perfect environment.
And so a lot of times being Antikemi can just come down to opting out of the session. Like, it can be a very small decision of, I can feel the borders of reality slipping on me.
Yeah.
I'm going to break the spell, put down this device, and go take a walk, or go to bed, or look my wife or my baby in the eyes.
Yeah.
Like, it can be very simple, very small decisions. I think one of the biggest ones is declining to participate in spectacles. The Charlie Kirk thing has continued to kind of live on the borders of my awareness in a kind of unbroken way. And that's been intentional on my part, not because I want to participate in the spectacle, but because I'm trying to understand it a little bit. I'm trying to understand not so much what happened, because I'm not sure we'll ever get there, but more because I'm trying to understand what purpose that serves. And I don't have a lock on it, but what I do see is that the one thing you can count on in that situation is a bottomless pit of false starts, dead ends, twisted narratives. It is designed to perpetuate a spectacle. And to me, then, you have to recognize that solving the mystery is not going to help you, really, even if you could. solving the mystery is really not going to help you, because what really did or did not happen on that day was never the point of the spectacle. I think that's something that I've become increasingly conscious of, is that spectacles don't survive in the public consciousness unless that is useful to somebody.
Yeah.
Because Guantanamo is still as bad as Obama and everybody ever said it was. But the spectacle hasn't been in our face in a long time.
No.
The threat of nuclear war is as real right now as we record as it was 4 months ago when it was leading all the headlines.
Right.
But the spectacle has receded for now.
Same thing with ICE.
Same thing with ICE.
Yeah.
That situation is raging on, but the spectacle has kind of receded. And I would imagine that there are people that are still glued to the spectacle, and that serves a purpose because it keeps that group busy.
Yeah.
Same thing with Charlie Kirk. I don't kid myself to think that the vast majority of Americans are still pondering the Charlie Kirk situation. It's a few million of us that have continued to kind of keep tabs on it. I think my reasons for that are probably different than a lot of people's, but I see people that are doing what I'm doing. They talk about it. But yes, there are groups that keep track of any number of these spectacles, but I'm talking about in the public awareness, spectacles only remain as long as they are useful. So when when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went into captivity in Babylon and were elevated to sit at the king's table, one of the first things they did was opt out of eating his delicacies. Those were the things that were not just for sustenance, even though that argument was made. Well, you're going to appear sickly, and then the king is going to have you executed because he's too good to be surrounded by sickly people, and it makes him look bad to have sickly people in his court.
Right.
And so Daniel says, well, fine, try it. Put us on the diet we're asking for a period of time. And if we look sickly, fine. We'll do what you're saying. But if we don't, can we please abstain? It was a really wise thing Daniel said, because basically he opted out of the fear-mongering. Mm-hmm. The fear-mongering said you need to keep abreast of the headlines. Pardon me. You need to stay up with what's going on. You need to trust the science. You need to avoid the mark of the beast. You need to, and Daniel just said, well, can we try it? And so they did, and those guys were healthier than all the other guys. And so they avoided, those things were not there, even though the line was that they were there to keep you healthy and robust. That's not why they were there. They were there to keep you mesmerized by the wealth of the kingdom, it was there to keep you glued to the spectacle. What is the king going to put on his table tonight? And by opting out of that, those guys basically inoculated themselves against that conditioning. And so when it came time, when the stakes were raised and it came time to either bow down or not, they were able to not, because they weren't already under the spell.
Yeah.
I think that's really become increasingly clear to me, is that so much of the Antikemi life of living in a way that is opposite to not the politics, not the cultural tropes of the world, but the very system that produces all those things. To live opposite to that, to lie opposite to that in our lives, which is what the Antikemi life means, really starts a lot of times with very subtle
Yep.
decisions.
Yep.
It doesn't start with refusing to bow to the 66-foot tall golden statue of the beast. It starts with just opting out of the reframing of our reality in ways that are predicated on the iniquity of bending the lines.
Yep. Because they could have easily said, we're in captivity. And so we don't necessarily have a choice. And we have to stay healthy. We have to eat to survive. And so while this is offensive to our conscience and offensive to the laws of God that we understand, the king's meat is put before us and we're in captivity. And so while we're in captivity, I'm sure the Most High will understand.
Yeah.
And they could have easily decided to bend that rule or bend the boundary and feel justified in doing so.
Yes. Because it's just survival.
It's just survival. But instead, they decided, well, not only are we not going to allow ourselves to fall into an iniquity mindset, we're not even going to try to intentionally transgress this law. No, we're going to abstain.
Yes.
Under the penalty of death, if anything. I mean, they could have done the same thing as far as bowing to the idol.
Yes.
Because it's interesting because on the flip side, you have Naaman, after he received his healing, before he left and was like, well, before I go back home, just letting you know, Elisha, like, I have to help my master to come into the temple, and as he bows to his false god, I may find myself bowing too, but just know I'm all in on the Most High. But
yes.
But it's interesting how he kind of already started to hedge his bet a little bit, as far as like I'm setting myself up to still color outside the lines a little bit if necessary.
Yes, sir.
I think we do got to be mindful.
There was a book I read when I was a kid called Vanya. I remember it was by this, I know the foreword was by Brother Andrew.
Oh.
I don't know if you remember that guy, missionary that went behind the Iron Curtain a lot. And Myrna Grant was the author of Vanya. I don't know how many people read it. It was big in my world, but I don't know how well known it was. But it was the true story of this Russian soldier, Ivan Moiseev, who was martyred for refusing to. He was a Russian believer who would not violate his conscience by either doing what the military would have preferred, which is being a secular humanist, a communist, or at least joining the state-sponsored church. He wouldn't do either. Because in Russia, there was a little bit of grace for people that were members of the Orthodox Church. But he was ultimately martyred but I just remember a line where he says he was refusing to, under torture, he was refusing to make the declarations that they were wanting him to make. And I think another soldier said to him, if Comrade Stalin, I may have the quote slightly wrong, but basically said to him, if Comrade Stalin says cabbages are carrots, then cabbages are carrots. The soldier was pleading with him.
Yeah.
Come on, bro, just play along.
Yeah.
Just don't die on us. But that's the thing. If I think it's in Proverbs, it says that if you faint in the day of trouble, how small is your strength? If we're going to build the strength we need to endure to the end under whatever conditions may wind up coming, we have to practice now.
Mm-hmm. With the small things.
Yeah, by pushing our plate back at the king's table.
Yes.
And saying, I'm going to repent of sin. I'm going to turn my back on transgression, and I'm going to refuse to play along with the distortions of iniquity.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to allow this world to determine the boundaries of reality for me. I understand that even though I have a birthright of dominion in this realm, and by the grace of God, I will spend eternity exercising that dominion, I'm in this realm, in this false reality overlay, in this matrix of sin and death. I'm just a pilgrim passing through.
Yeah.
I'm not from here. I'm not going to here.
Come on.
I don't belong here. My citizenship is elsewhere. Because the powers that be in this world, they are aware. Mm-hmm. They are doing what they're doing with a high hand. They do know. They're not just falling into carnality and the sensory nature. They are full-chested, 10 toes down, daring the Most High to do something about their plan to establish dominion in this realm without his say. Because we're dealing with the final chapter of the oldest conflict in the universe.
Yeah, there's a lot of places we can go, but I almost want to leave that there, man.
So.
I think that the way that we kind of frame that, that's good food for thought. Of like recognizing first and foremost, like there is deception, there's subterfuge that's happening. And we can't plead ignorance anymore. We have to intentionally fight against it. And we don't fight alone. Thanks be to God, there is absolutely atonement. The blood of Jesus covers a multitude. Or love covers a multitude of sin, but the blood of Jesus absolutely atones. It's by love that he allowed his body to be crushed and broken and bleed and die. And I don't think anything else needs to be said. I loved how you said, man, we're choosing to turn our back against transgression, open our eyes up to the world of iniquity that surrounds us and not participate, and do our absolute best to flee and fight against sin.
And it should help us respond with more grace to people that we see. You know, you see people boldly digging their heels in positions that you just go, that flies in the face of logic. Like, what you're saying is objectively nonsensical. How can you not see that? What kind of moron must you be? No, that's not what happened. Like Lot, their soul was vexed so much for so long that eventually, to end the pain of being unable to find any footing in any kind of genuine reality, they allowed themselves the small luxury of being suggestible enough to allow someone to frame the world for them in a way that at least stopped the pain of being unable to figure out what's up and what's down. And so now you can pray for them and love them and live out loud in front of them in a way that offers them an opportunity to remember why they were so confused in the first place.
Yes.
And to maybe become curious again now that the noise has receded a little. Yes, they accepted a false reality. You just have to remember they're living in a funhouse world. Mm-hmm. But they used to know that. Mm-hmm. They don't know that now because they accepted what the hypnotist implanted. But they did know it. And there's a memory of that in their soul. And maybe now your witness, your testimony, your love, your refusal to judge them harshly and look down on them and despise them for being in the false reality overlay that they're in, but just to live love loudly enough in their presence that you may be able to offer them a chance to realize that there was another way out of that dark room. There was another way out of that circus. They didn't know it then.
Yeah.
But maybe they can know it now. Mm-hmm. And so maybe don't look down on them. Maybe recognize that there but for the grace of God go I. And that's a good reason to stop scrolling sooner than we usually do, mm-hmm. and to stop being as entertained by the spectacles as we usually are. And because we are also not impervious. We also need to decline the king's delicacies. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, a bunch of people converted when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow.
Let that ripple effect happen.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, go and sin no more.
Trespassers. Live Antikemi.
Be Hebrew. We love you guys.